Alright, so the project I'll be overviewing with you guys today is I developed an integrated pest management plan for the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park and Curecanti National Recreation Area. Before I get into what integrated pest management is, I just kind of want to familiarize you guys with the area we're talking about here. So we have Gunnison over here, and here's Montrose, just to give you a reference. And this area in light green is Curecanti, and in dark green we have here the Black Canyon. These are two units, both managed by the National Park Service. With respect to resources, a lot of it's just managed as if the two park units were one. And it starts a few miles west of town, follows the Gunnison River into the Blue Mesa Reservoir, and into the Morro Point Reservoir, and finally the Crystal Reservoir before it enters into the Black Canyon itself. And the parkland is surrounded by private land, BLM land, and some Forest Service land. So what is integrated pest management? This is an excerpt from the plan itself, and integrated pest management, also known as IPM, is a strategy designed to be more effective and efficient at controlling pests than traditional approaches by considering all available pest control techniques and choosing the best technique based on effectiveness, environmental impacts, and operational efficiency. So basically, it's considering all the potential techniques that could be used and trying to select the ones that have the least amount of impact, the greatest amount of effectiveness, and the least amount of economic and other costs. So this plan focuses on terrestrial invasive plants and rodent insect pests in the parks. The rodent insects are somewhat of a lesser focus for the plan itself. They are a concern, but they're more of kind of a human health and safety concern. For example, trying to limit the potential spread of hantavirus in park buildings and in public campgrounds and things like that. But the primary focus of the plan is on terrestrial invasive plants. Aquatic invasive species are addressed through a different segment of the park. So what plants do we have at these two parks? There are about 30 total species that are currently managed, and these are the 10 that are most commonly encountered in the field. So we've got Canada thistle and musk thistle, mullein, cheatgrass, a few different kinds of knapweeds, kochia, Russian thistle, and Sutton's chamomile. And all these 30 species are generally treated and controlled every year, but these are by far the ones we encounter the most. And it is the Park Service's mandate to preserve its native ecosystems. And some areas with these plants are they're spread out, just a few here and there, and some of them are just full-on monocultures of one plant or multiple types of these invasive plants. And so it's important that we manage these plants in order to accomplish the park's mission in preserving its native ecosystem. So this is kind of an outline of the integrated pest management plan that was developed, and I'll go into every one of these details in a lot more in a bit, but just to give you an idea, we've got the compliance aspect. That's a big focus of the plan. Anything with federal government agencies have a lot of policy involved typically. There's some education programs, collaboration measures between the park and other entities. Planning, obviously this plan itself is a significant part of that. Different treatment methods for the plants, I'll get more into those later. And the final important aspect is monitoring and record keeping to improve the vegetation management program at the parks. So first, to get into compliance, the plan addresses different federal laws as well as state and local laws that it must be in compliance with in order to operate appropriately. And the biggest one of these that this plan deals with is NEPA compliance. NEPA stands for National Environmental Policy Act. And this is something that all federal agencies must be compliant with when they're undergoing any kind of project. And so since this is a new IPM plan, we wanted to make sure that we were compliant with that. So the first step in that was to develop an interdisciplinary team, and this consisted of the head of the resources division at the park, along with the ornithologist, archaeologist, wildlife biologist, and hydrologist. And in July of last year, we had the first ID team meeting, and we went over the environmental screening form, which is something that is specific to the Park Service in determining what your NEPA pathway is. If you're not familiar with what that is, that basically means whether whether or not you're going to have a potentially significant impact to the environment with your project and what kind of evaluation you have to do for that. So the planning, environment, and public comment website of the Park Service is where this is located. So during this meeting, we went through the document, and basically you rate the potential impact to various park resources on a gradient of scale. And the first conclusion, or the conclusion from this first meeting, was that we would do an environmental assessment, which meant that there could potentially be a significant impact, and further analysis would be needed to conclude on that. However, something that emerged in the fall of last year is that the Park Service changed its NEPA guidelines. And this involved any number of different things that we have to take some time to learn, but the Park Service is basically trying to make the NEPA process a bit more streamlined and a bit less burdened by unnecessary things. So some of these environmental assessment documents could be upwards of 400 pages or so. The Park Service is trying to limit the length on that. And something that was essential to this is that the environmental screening form was changed so that the potential impact to park resources went from kind of a gradient of potential impact to either a significant impact or no significant impact. So in December, we conducted the second ID team meeting, and that meeting concluded that an environmental assessment was unnecessary, and we would merely do a categorical exclusion, which is to say that there shouldn't be any significant impact to any of the park resources. So moving beyond compliance, these are some of the other aspects of the IPM plan. So education programs, this is not a huge focus of the plan, but it is addressed. There are internal training and awareness measures for park staff. So every year, in the early part of the summer or late spring, when most of the employees have been hired on for the year, the park has long introductory meetings, and the invasive plant aspect of the park is addressed. The point of contact for any member of the park staff encountering invasive plants is the park echologist, and that's addressed in this meeting. Also, field guides are distributed to various other employees in different divisions of the park, particularly some people who may be out in the field and encounter invasive plants, or and potentially find new infestations and things like that. So collaboration is also a significant aspect to accomplishing the goals in IPM. Two parks put together are somewhere around 73,000 acres in land area. That's a lot of area to cover. Usually there are 4 seasonal crew members hired each year to manage that. So that's a lot of area for 4 people. So the park collaborates with a lot of other entities. So we have the Western Colorado Conservation Corps, Gunnison and Montrose counties, Bureau of Land Management, the Gunnison Basin Weed Commission, which is made up of quite a few different members, the Soap Creek Watershed Weed Management Area, and then neighboring landowners are also utilized in, for access and things like that. And the rest of these entities, I mean, some of this is doing contract work, working together, different things like that. To try and cover that 73,000 acres. Planning, obviously this plan itself again is an essential point of that. So in this plan, management objectives for the IPM program are outlined. Feasibility is addressed, so the 30 total species mentioned before are the species that have been determined to be in need of control and suppression, and that are also feasible. So if something there's no budget for it, or it exists in a situation that is physically impossible to control, those aren't addressed. And also primary treatment areas, you know that 73,000 acres of the park isn't 100% invasive plants, thankfully. So some areas take more precedence over others. A lot of these areas exist in around public access areas, so along trails, visitation sites. There's also some old cattle grazing areas that have a lot of invasive plants and treatment on them. So those areas are outlined in the plan as well. Then to get into the different treatment methods as to how the plants are treated, this is kind of really the meat of the IPM plan itself. So not one treatment works for every single plant in every single place. And so this plan considers different treatments that work either by themselves or in conjunction to try and accomplish most effective outcome in controlling those plants. So cultural treatments, this involves reseeding, potential irrigation, transplanting, things like that to help native plants outcompete invasive plants. Manual and mechanical treatments, which are physical removal of the plant or bagging of seed heads and take them to a landfill. Chemical treatments, the application of herbicide. And finally, biological treatments. This is, I would say, the most controversial treatment out of the four. And in the past, this has not been practiced at either of these park units. And there's no necessarily set plans. This plan doesn't create, it doesn't suggest biological treatments, but it does create the avenue in the future if park managers think that's worth considering. Then that would be, this plan allows for that and provides the steps for that. So this is basically introducing a non-native species to control an invasive non-native species, which sometimes work and sometimes the introduced species becomes invasive itself. So this is an excerpt from the plan, just to kind of give you an idea. This is a portion of the priority treatment table. So we have the areas on the left, plants that occur there on the right. And if you wanted to look at a specific plant, let's say mullein at Silver Creek, here's kind of an excerpt of the treatment method area. So we've got kind of an introduction to the biology and basic elements of the plant, the potential threat, and then down here the treatment methods that are suggested. So manual control, hand filling the plants, if flowers and seed heads have developed, then they should be bagged and sent to a landfill. And then chemical control, if the plant hasn't gone to seed yet, the herbicide milestone can be foliar sprayed to control it. So the final aspect is monitoring and record keeping. So every year, the Northern Colorado Plateau Network comes out and monitors transects to potentially find new invasive plant invasions, as well as see the progress of other invasive plants. Field crew findings is also a very significant aspect of this. Just, you know, the field crew is on the ground, seeing this firsthand. So just their encounters every day, then reporting that to the park ecologist is a very essential aspect. The data logs, they keep herbicide logs, manual control logs, and any kind of treatment logs are recorded on the park hard drives. And then every year, restoration summaries and reports are performed on old restoration sites, and those are monitored to see the potential effectiveness of the treatment that was performed, or to evaluate if any new treatments are required. So the sources that went into the development of this plan, there are a number of different things. First and foremost would just be experience, first-hand experience. I've worked at the parks for the past 3 summers. So my own experience went into that. The park ecologist has been there for over a decade, I believe. So she has a lot of first-hand experience with this, and that was definitely the biggest element to tailoring this plan to these specific parks and making it the most useful in this situation. Collaboration between the park ecologist and myself, as well as the ID team, for example. The data logs are also used as kind of like a hard version of finding where plants are treated, what the priority areas are, how it's been done in the past. And then various recommended management resources, so federal, state, academic resources, things like that. Specific info for the park, so other plans, such as like the backcountry management plan, different things like that. And then another one of the big sources were other IPM plans in the Colorado Plateau region. So the Dinosaur National Monument IPM plan and the Southeast Utah Working Group IPM plan were also used to really help provide like the framework for this plan as well. So potential recommendations for the future in order to make this project more significant and long-lasting. One thing I think would be potentially helpful would be creating a mapping aspect. There has been some mapping done in the past. Some of it's been kind of inconsistent, hasn't been performed every single year, but I think that could be really useful in providing just a very visual framework of the priority areas, the plants in each area, and tracking the changes in those. Data records have been somewhat inconsistent throughout the years. Every year, different seasonals are hired and everyone does something different. So standardizing those and having them a little more organized could be more helpful in using that data for updating the IPM plan Potentially going with different landowners adjacent to the park, preventing the seed bank being spread into the park, and then finally adaptive management, keeping this a living document, updating it with new information, and keeping it contemporary for future use. And are there any questions?
I'm curious, Trent, how much did you look at like past success of treatments? Because I'm guessing that, you know, that as you said, there's a lot of like experience in that park and you know what's worked and what hasn't worked. Were you looking at that to try to inform?
Yeah, that was one of the aspects. I had hoped that would have been a lot more useful. Some of it wasn't quite as useful as I thought or hoped it would be. I mean, the data logs, some of them are inconsistent in terms of like the way the information is reported, and that can make it difficult to kind of analyze that. And also, there's some different areas, like, I mean, when I was looking at different sites, there were a few sites that it seemed like there was progressively less amount treated every year, but there's kind of a lot of just kind of back and forth variation in those data logs. And I mean, some of those only go back 5 or 6 years, and there may have been a few-year gap. At least I couldn't find some of those, so it wasn't quite as useful as I hoped it would be in determining like what would be the most successful, or what would be potentially more successful. But it was, I mean, the data logs were still useful in providing what those priority areas were and the treatment methods that had been used in the past, and were at least working in suppressing and controlling those populations.
I know you've worked for like a few different organizations in a lot of weed management. Do you feel like the National Park Service has more resources and are more committed to sort of weed management than maybe some other organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've worked for just about every federal agency except for the BLM. I've worked for nonprofit groups and working for a private company now. And I feel like the Park Service is actually one of the best invasive plant programs out of all of those. I mean, a lot of times, some other agencies, it's just, I mean, Forest Service and BLM have so much area to cover a lot of times that they just can't develop the resources to cover all those areas, or it may not be an entire priority. Nonprofit groups and private companies, they seem like they're oftentimes working more for, I guess, grants or potential profits or things like that. But the Park Service, I feel like they do have a lot of resources. They seem, I know some of the different agencies to really prioritize managing invasive plants because their mission is different from the other federal agencies in terms of not just conserving but preserving, the native ecosystems that exist within their boundaries. And so it's definitely, I would say, a higher priority for the park. And so most of the parks I've worked at do seem like they have much better just invasive motivation to treat invasive plants as well as implementation of that than other agencies and companies.
I was wondering if you use drones to sort of monitor your success of management or what changes occur in different parts. The park is sort of, parts of the park are awkward to get to.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's really not something I'd thought about, to be honest. I've never used drones before, and as far as I know, I've never encountered anyone using drones for monitoring like that, but I mean, that's not a bad idea. It could save potentially a lot of time and trouble, to getting to inaccessible places, like if there are invasive plants on the side of Black Canyon or deep down in the Black Canyon, that could be potentially a lot more useful, I think. So definitely as technology continues to develop, hopefully Park Service and other invasive plant managers can utilize that to make things more effective. Yeah.
When you're talking about the priority areas in the park, are you guys, like, is first priority areas that you've treated before that have a lot of invasives, or is it kind of more pristine areas that there's possibly new ones popping up?
Yeah, so it really depends. A lot of this is based on priority areas that have been selected in the past. And those are selected for any number of things. I mean, potentially sometimes it is large areas that are, in public view, and just maintaining that, or trying to prevent a seed bank that would more likely encounter people in the public and get on their shoes and further spread those. But also other smaller patches that are more easily to control, or that are ecologically more important. Those are also considered for high priority. So, and, that's all the time I got. So thank you.